Well, the Race to Zero is a unique initiative by non-state actors. Think about business, think about finance, think about subnational government, think about civil society, cities, and the list goes on, to actually dramatically step change the momentum that we need to getting us to a decarbonized economy. The most important thing in this is to give the politicians courage. We know that the geopolitical situation is extremely difficult right now, people being pulled back to the here and now, and yet we need to continue to accelerate our path of decarbonizing our global economies. The consequences of not doing that will be significantly higher than any of the shorter term issues that we're currently facing. And obviously, optimizing within a current system that frankly isn't designed to deliver anymore will not give us the desired results. One of the key reasons, I believe, why we're falling significantly short. So the Race to Zero is about systems transformation, is about encouraging politicians to be bold, and it is about the non-state actors stepping up and co-owning this agenda at a high level. What I focus on myself specifically is the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals with the emphasis on climate and inequality. We do that by bringing our book Net Positive to life with individual companies and a collective of companies. We're doing that in transforming education with all the major institutions in the world. Absolutely key that we create the right leaders. And we're doing that by ensuring that we direct the financial flows into the areas where it counts most. Well, global food companies have an enormous role to play in changing our food system, and by doing so, also mitigating the effects of climate change. Our food system is broken, and what makes it so important is that it goes to the heart of the Sustainable Development Goals. It deals with poverty, it deals with climate change, it deals with inequality, it deals with depletion of our scarce resources on land, forests, oceans, and the list goes on. It's at the heart of anything. In climate change itself, it's about 30% of the problem. Think about deforestation, think about food waste, think about methane, think about degraded land, and the list goes on. But the exciting thing is it's also half of the solution, 30% of the solution. So the global food and agriculture systems that we currently have is about responsible for this 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions, 70% of fresh water use, 80% of biodiversity loss. And obviously the consequences are enormous. 900 million people food insecure in this world, the numbers going up. 3 billion people cannot afford a healthy diet. On the other side, 2 billion people more or less overweight or obese with enormous healthcare costs. In fact, if we can turn this around and make it a sustainable, regenerative system, then the social, economic, and environmental benefits that would be associated with that would be amount to over $10 trillion annually. So an enormous opportunity for business to do something about it and transform the food systems. Obviously, the first thing that business needs to do, which is probably the most important thing, is to be sure that we help the frontline systems players, especially the farmers, who are probably the most stressed in this value chain, build resilience to climate risk. And that cannot be done better than moving them to regenerative agriculture. That cannot be done better than ensuring that they have economic viability in their business models. Then the food companies need to align their business models to the 1.5 degrees. It's very important that in everything they do, for every part of the footprint that they have in their value chain, that they look at that through the lens of climate change. Is deforestation in my value chain? Am I degrading land? Where are the potent methane emissions? How much food do I waste? Do I use renewable energy where I can? And the list goes on. Yeah, on the demand side, business also has an important role to play. And I would say in everything you do, always take this lens of human health, of planetary health, and that should obviously what we call net positive. How can you profit from improving the state of the world, not by making it worse? And that has to be nature positive, that has to be health positive, and by all means possible. We've overshot these planetary boundaries to such an extent that frankly being net zero is not enough anymore. And our food systems are ideal to actually make them sources of carbon capture again. Business can play an incredible role, obviously, in their own business models and driving the innovative business models that get to these sustainable regenerative practices, in redirecting the finance flow and being sure that these transitions don't come at a cost of the farmer itself, who is already virtually bankrupt, but can be financed by people in the value chain, ultimately all of us benefiting from that. And last but not least, being sure that governments have the right rules, laws, and regulations to drive us in the right direction. Right now, lots of perverse government subsidies that actually drive us in the wrong direction. So it boils down in the business models of any company to promote behavioral change, healthier diets, probably the most important thing, helping consumers make better purchase decisions. Many promotional activities are actually encouraging overconsumption of food waste, attacking their waste in their value chain, especially when it comes to retail and consumers, but also advertising responsibly. And then in R&D and development, I would expect that on an annual basis, especially the processed food, would reduce the amount of trans fatty acids, of salts and sugars. Don't wait for legislation to dictate upon that or a tax to come. Actively, proactively attack this. And then, as we talked about advocacy or regulations or government policies, don't stand in the way. Go out of the way if you don't agree, but don't stand in the way, but actively turn this around and become a positive advocate. Working these demand sides and supply sides together, it is by all means feasible to get to about 50% regenerative agriculture by 2030 from the current levels of 8%. And this might well be the biggest contribution we can make to mitigate the effects of climate change. So I want to encourage all food businesses to sign up to and endorse the Food Systems Call to Action to protect people, nature, and climate, and hopefully be able to submit a statement of action before the COP, which is by the end of November, if not soon after. In our book, Net Positive, we talk about the elephants in the room, and we talk about money in politics, we talk about corruption, the need to pay tax, human rights violations, industry associations, lobbying differently than what companies publicly portray. And all of this is eroding trust in business, eroding trust in our economic system. And ultimately, you lose the confidence as a company to be business worthy. Employees that don't want to work with you or for you or will be disengaged. Suppliers in a value chain that don't want to participate. Key partners that you need in your communities and beyond to be successful that will distance themselves. So what we see is that companies that proactively lead and help shape the regulatory environment to what society truly needs are also the companies that in the end will do better, grow faster, be more profitable, and frankly, more innovative. They position their companies for this greener, more sustainable, more inclusive future instead of this brown, destructive future that we're coming from. And frankly, the major changes that we need to make, we cannot get there without legislation or government setting clear directions. With Paris, there was a clear direction set to 1.5 degrees. That unlocked investments. When governments in countries make clear commitments to go to electric vehicles by 2030 or 2035, it accelerates the transformation. So business needs that certainty because that certainty actually allows for security around their investments. Business also needs to ensure that government policy goes in the right direction. On climate alone, you have $1.3 trillion of direct subsidies that push you still into fossil fuel. We cannot afford it anymore. In fact, the indirect costs of that are estimated by the IMF to be over $7 trillion. So it's ludicrous what we're doing there. And it's in businesses' benefit to ensure that these government policies actually help this transition, but also create a level playing field. So there are many examples, frankly, where business is stepping up in this regards. Think about the plastic treaty that is now being negotiated in Nairobi as we sit here. Think about the nature restoration law in Europe. Think about the Treaty of the Oceans or the COP15. In many of these circumstances, we've actually seen positive advocacy for business. But there is no doubt that there is a group of businesses that either abdicates their responsibility to participate or actually overtly tries to protect their own narrowly defined self-interest and opposes any piece of legislation that goes into that direction. I think it's irresponsible behavior, but would be naive to not recognize the fact that the vested order is pushing back. So it is important of CEOs to set targets in line with science. It is important for CEOs to put action behind words. And it is important for CEOs to get the right frameworks in place to create that level playing field and that acceleration of that conversion that we need. Ultimately, business cannot succeed in societies that fail, nor do I believe can it be a bystander in a system that gives it life in the first place. Standards are coming in quite rapidly, so that moves our floor up, but companies that are proactive are actually more in charge of their own destiny than companies that react. We now have seen, not surprisingly, major corporations in the energy, like Duke Energy or Exxon Mobil, the famous Glencore or Repsols or others, being called out, especially between the gap of statement and action as far as it goes to climate policy. And it is increasingly important that we call out those companies overtly so that we drive the right behavior that we now need in the time frame that we have. And obviously, we're familiar with the recognition and accountability framework that the UN has put in place, or the European sustainable reporting disclosure guidelines that are coming into place. But don't be forced into change. Leaders lead change. As I always say, it's better to make the dust than eat the dust. Well, there's definitely more complexity in understanding nature and how to integrate it into the business models than climate, where we've been a little bit longer at the game and have a deeper understanding. But I do believe that we're starting to understand the importance of nature more and more. Biodiversity is now understood as being the very stuff of life, and then unfortunately it's collapsing faster than ever before. And we know why. Changes in land and sea use, exploitation of natural resources, climate change, pollution and invasive species, and the list goes on. And the effects of that are now more apparent than they perhaps were 5 or 10 years ago. Hence, it's higher on the agenda of businesses. 1 in 8 species of plants or animals is under threat of extinction. 90% of marine fish stock is already fully exploited, overexploited, or depleted for that matter. 36% of the tropical forests have disappeared. These are some of the world's oldest living ecosystems that we need to be very careful about. Half of the coral reefs are gone. So this is a very important thing, especially if you know that at the end of the day, the human beings, the most vulnerable, are again paying the price of that. 3.6 billion people right now already in the world as we talk here struggle with the issues of water scarcity at least 1 month each year, if not more often. So every sector of the economy, I would argue every business, whatever its size or location, depends on nature and its services. Up to 600 billion of annual crop production that we depend on for our food systems are pollinated. If you don't have the pollination because of collapse of biodiversity, you don't have the food system. A collapse of eco-services like that could affect the global economy or GDP by anywhere between $2.5 and $3 trillion. So research shows, to your point, that only about 5% of global Fortune 500 companies currently have targets to tackle biodiversity loss, compared to about 85% on climate change. So we have a way to go. But I was very pleasant to see the plans that we now have on with the COP15 on the biodiversity loss, the Treaty of the Oceans. I think it's coming higher on the agenda. The more so because we need this planet to compensate for our shortcomings on the emissions. It historically has absorbed more than 50% of human-induced carbon emissions. And it's 10 times more effective to do this than all the other methods that we're trying to talk about but are not able to implement. So companies understand this increasingly so, but they struggle with what that means and how to implement it in the business. So it's more about the how than about the why. And the science-based targets for nature, mirroring the science-based targets for climate, once they come out, will be a welcome contribution to this debate. So shifting to nature positive models is probably, again, one of the biggest business opportunities, and companies that seize those, I believe even now, are doing extremely well. But we need the finance to flow again. We just simply don't have enough money going in that direction, and governments need to get it higher on the agenda. And thanks to the Race to Zero, we now have firm plans also at the COP, which historically has been discussing the energy transition only, to also look at our food and land use systems. First, we should recognize that a transformation that we need to do to totally decarbonize our global system, to restore our biodiversity, and doing that in the time frame we have is not an easy thing to do. If it would be easy, someone would have done it before you. But all the economics point towards it's the right thing to do, besides the moral reasons that we're well aware of. But companies that increasingly position themselves for this more sustainable, more equitable and inclusive future, now and for generations to come, companies that have business models that operate in harmony with planet Earth, or actually enhance the benefits of planet Earth, are actually doing significantly better. When we started at Unilever about 15 years ago, with what is now called the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, of decoupling our growth from environmental impact, increasing our social impact, it was a revolutionary plan. Concerned that this might be going at the expense of shareholders. Limited data was available to show that it actually would drive businesses. And frankly, we had a hard time linking it to value creation models. Fast forward yourself 15 years, and it is now clear that companies that are more diverse, companies that more aggressively tackle climate change or human rights issues in their value chains, are actually getting increasingly rewarded for that by the financial market. So this notion that sustainable products have to be more expensive is certainly not true. In Unilever, it's a very competitive market if you're in the shampoos and soaps and the soups. But we were able, over a relatively limited period of time, to move all of our raw materials to sustainable sourcing, to provide health and well-being for an incremental 1.3 billion people, with hand washing, with healthier foods, with oral care. More importantly, to move our total business model to green energy, to be gender balanced, to guarantee livable wages in the value chain. And at no time during my tenure were there trade-offs that would, or investments that would have had a payout beyond 3 years. In fact, the opposite. Over the 10-year time period, we had a 300% shareholder return, outperforming all of our competitive sets as well as the market. And year after year, for 10 years in a row, we had top and bottom line growth. So this notion of doing well and doing good, it's actually very important that it actually goes together. Only if you're sustainable, only if you're purpose-driven, only if you think multi-stakeholder, will you be able to get the performance right now. It's purpose, it's profit through purpose. It's not even any more profit and purpose. But you need to change your mindset. You need to move from risk to opportunity. You need to move from seeing it as a cost to an investment. And frankly, I believe that when the future of humanity is at stake, we should take it a little bit more seriously than many companies do now. So there are some hurdles. I understand that. But it is also clear that 80% can be done today with technology that is available. And we basically need the willpower or the leadership to do it individually in your companies or your value chain, to do it collectively across industries, or increasingly with governments to drive these more transformative changes. And that goes to the heart of why we've created the Race to Zero, the Race to Resilience, or the Race to Breakthrough for that matter. And any company that is joining this, we can actually show that in general, their financial results are better again once more than the ones that stay on the sideline. Yeah, well, first, people need to understand that delivering the Paris Agreement, the global biodiversity framework, and the 1.5 degrees is not a target. It's actually a limit for the planet that we all share. And currently, there is no question that we're all off track. Stock-taking moment, and it shows this increasing gap. We're actually creating still the issues faster than we're applying solutions. Tremendous efforts are happening with many companies, many governments, many other participants in the global world. But as long as we are in this linear extractive production model, and as long as we just push a simple measure like GDP, we will continue to create issues faster than solutions. Yet we're on track in many of the areas where we've invested. We've seen a big acceleration in investment in green energy, solar investments, wind are now significantly cheaper than fossil in most places in the world. Electric vehicles will be 2/3 of car sales by 2030 under the current trajectory. Solar and wind could be 40% of the electric supply. So accelerating those investments will get us there, and we would certainly want to see some of that happening in the outcomes of the COP28. And to pick up the pace, I think we need all of us once more, because the governments are sidetracked by geopolitical issues, sidetracked by short-term political gains. And if they don't hear from us that, first of all, it's possible, secondly, that many of us are doing it already, but third and most importantly, that it is the only viable route to create long-term profitable businesses and a long-term prosperous society. If they don't hear that loud and clearly from all different stakeholders in society, I believe they will be less ambitious. So for the COP, we need that ambition. No backsliding, loss and damage now, the 100 billion Green Climate Fund, just to show that we live up to our commitments. These are important things that need to come out. But then more importantly, also, we want to have some very simple focus areas that everybody needs to understand. First one, transforming our energy systems, tripling renewable energy, doubling the energy efficiency. Secondly, the issues that we talked, which is really transforming our relationship with nature, being sure that we not only conserve nature, but that we restore and increasingly transform our businesses to enhance nature. And then last but not least, I hope we will see significant progress in transforming our financial systems. It is a scandal how we are treating many parts of the world, not least the emerging markets, by not giving them access to financing, not giving them access to vaccines, not giving them access to a meager 100 billion. Just a war in the Middle East is now projected to cost us 1 trillion. COVID in Europe and the US, we spent a combined 16 trillion. In fact, conflicts and wars in this world are eating up 10 to 12% of global GDP. And the root of all of this, to get to attack the issues of climate change or biodiversity destruction, we're not even to collectively come up with 100 billion. You have to ask yourself what our politicians are doing, or if they're really worse being called the most intelligent species. So transforming our financial system, we must, and helping these emerging markets, which is 85% of the world's population, to drive to this, or to convert their economies to this more sustainable model, is a obligation that we have. First and foremost, we are citizens of planet Earth, and most of these issues, if not all of these issues, don't recognize these artificially drawn boundaries that have come up over the history of mankind. So the ambitions are high. And if we fall short on these ambitions on the COP28, I think there will be a public outcry beyond the magnitude that we're seeing right now. That shows that the confidence in our politicians has been lost, that trust in business probably is more declining than increasing. And I think many other institutions, non-governmental institutions, will take charge at many different levels. Finally, we need to recognize that the COP needs to be well represented by people that are affected. As I said before, ultimately, this is a people plan. So where is the youth? Where are these indigenous people? Where are the women? Where are those groups in society that are disproportionately affected by our shortcomings? I sure hope that they will not only have a voice during the conference, but increasingly that they will have a seat at the table, because ultimately we're talking about their future. So the expectations are high, and I think for the benefit of humanity, for the benefit of the children, or for your own children, if you're a negotiator or if you're a politician, I think this is the moment. Wangari Maathai said it very well when she said that in the course of history, there comes a time when humanity is called upon to rise to a higher level of consciousness, or what she called a higher moral ground. I hope you agree with me that more than ever, that time is now. So thank you very much.